morning show. We're broadcasting to you today on Channel 9 on WJOP-LP Newburyport, FM 96.3. We're also live streaming on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube channel at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm so pleased this morning to welcome people who are going to be able to talk to us about the Maritime Museum's brand new exhibit opening Saturday, April 2nd, Legendary Newburyporters, the sculpture of Jeffrey Briggs. So let me introduce you to my guests who are here today. First, we have Joan Whitlow. She's the executive director of the Custom House Maritime Museum, and she also served on the exhibition committee. Joan, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're also fortunate to have the sculptor. Jeffrey Briggs is here. He's a formally trained artist known for the Swan Sculpture that crowns the 100-year-old fountain at Bartlet Mall. He also did the carousel animals on the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston. Jeff and his wife Lindley embarked on their wood sculpture business with the delightful name Briggs Bugs and Butterflies when they moved to Newburyport in 1973. Jeff, welcome. Thanks for coming to visit the morning show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
My pleasure. And Skip Motes is here. He and his wife Marge both have a passion for history and the ability to dig for historical facts, and they're both long-term supporters of the arts. This talented writer duo quickly coordinated and managed 14 different historians. I'll repeat that because I'm impressed. 14 different historians, and then edited them all to produce the accompanying publication for the exhibit called Legendary Newburyporters, Sculpture by Jeffrey Briggs, a Chronicle of Achievement in the 18th and 19th centuries. They also were the historians and writers for legends Capt. Brown and William Bartlet. So Skip, welcome. Thank you so much for visiting.
Yeah, pleasure to be here.
And last but hardly least, we have Susan Edwards here. She is the Collections and Development Manager at the Museum of Old Newbury, and she was the historian and writer for legend Jacob Perkins. Susan, great to see you again and welcome. Thanks for taking time to visit.
It's lovely to be here.
Likewise, Susan. Well, Joan, let's start with you. Please tell us how the idea for this exhibit came about.
Well, the idea, first of all, let me just explain. I'm in the gallery for those that are listening on the radio. I have a bit of an echo and I apologize for that, but the visual is just so tremendously wonderful. But the idea really was something that Jeff started with 4 years ago. He really has always been very in tune to the history of Newburyport and the individuals that have lived and played a part not only nationally, but sometimes on a global scale, their contributions, whether it be economics, money, trade, navigation, just an array of contributions. And he started this as a personal quest. But the criteria to define legendary is somebody that had some kind of impact or made a significant contribution. What was hard was controlling Jeff because he sort of started off with an array of how to select, and there's so many to choose from. And I think he would agree with that. So we had to narrow it to the 18th and 19th century.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'd have to, because Newburyport's been around for a long time. So, and I'm despite the slight echo, I'm really glad you're in the gallery because looking at it just makes you want to kind of dive past you, Joan, and see those sculptures. And I'm sure everybody will feel that way. Well, thank you for that overall description of how the idea came about, Joan. Could you describe for us what the visitors will see and learn and experience when they visit the exhibit? Sure.
This is sort of an unusual exhibit. It's not a typical history, nor is it a typical art display. It's one artist's conceptualization of historic figures. And what's really sort of interesting is that we have so many wonderful, enthusiastic individuals in the community and resources into our past that they became the voices today talking about the people of the past, in their mind, why they're historically significant. So you have a today's voice interpreting someone's actions of the past, and then you also have the artist rendition. And we have the ability to not only speak at the pedestal level where you just sort of have a quick and dirty, who this person is and an elevator speech, why they're important. But if you're interested in more, you can read the storyboard on the wall that dives a little bit more, but it always is contrasted with an artist's statement, his challenges, Jeff's, sort of interpretation, why he poised the person with the individual iconic instruments that they're with and so forth. But then we also have an artistic insight into the creation, because all of these are unique, one-of-a-kind sculptural pieces unto themselves. They are maquettes that have been cast, and that in itself is really magnificent. So we have an 8-minute loop video that had been created that traces the beginning of one individual, Timothy Palmer, through the entire process of not only working with clay and then the various molds to create the cast and out of resins and then to paint. So there's something for everybody, I think.
Yeah, Joan, that sounds just absolutely fascinating and multi-layered. Oh, I can't wait to go see it. Thank you for that description. Could you also tell us, I believe that in addition to the exhibition itself, that there are some lectures that are planned. Could you just sketch out what that part of the exhibit will be?
Well, that is definitely something that we're still in the planning works. We don't want to just keep it to just a select group. We really want to open it up to the larger community. How we do that, on what day and time, but more importantly, do we group people together or do we juxtapose them? So we're still sort of grappling with that with our exhibitions and programs committee.
So stay tuned, in other words, but they will be coming. Okay, thank you so much for that wonderful description of Joan. It just sounds fascinating. Well, Jeff, I'd like to talk to you next. I'm curious to find out, had you worked before on creating sculptures of actual historical persons, and what were the challenges of doing that?
Well, I've done some other sculptures that are public sculptures of individuals over the years. But this particular project was sort of near to my heart. When I first moved here in the early 70s, I realized that this town was full of incredible history and incredible past people. And it always bothered me that the town didn't celebrate any of them except for one. And so later on, when my sort of quasi-retired, artist never really retired, but I started this project, hoping that it would stimulate interest in doing something more in the future. To my astoundment, I discovered this huge audience of like historians, people who have spent their entire lives studying these individuals and written books and articles, and it's just amazing. And when I turned to Marge and Skip Motes for additional help with interpreting the historical part of each one of these individuals, they jumped in with both feet and did incredible work on this. And suddenly we had a whole quadrille of people who are helping me to create these individual images. What's really important, though, is not so much the images, but the information that they convey. And that the mission here is to try to get as many people in our community to appreciate what they have as far as their historic past, and to appreciate it and to do something more with it than what you're doing now.
Well, that sounds fascinating too, Jeff. I'm curious, could you explain to us then how, having made the wonderful discovery that there were all these historians in Newburyport, how did you collaborate with them? And how did their input about the details of the historic person's life or their impact, how did that impact your artistic interpretation in the sculptures?
Well, it's very difficult to interpret an individual in history without having a context of where they come from, what the society around them looked like, what they were dealing with, what the limits were, what the advantages were, all the things that historians study in great detail. And this takes years on an individual basis to get that kind of information. But that's the kind of information that a creative mind needs to interpret what this person might look like physically.
Yeah.
Because very little information exists on the 18th and 19th century people as what they look like. There might be a portrait or two, there might be some other information, but you have to know about the physical aspects of the person. You have to know what the clothing looks like in the time period. You have to know what they were dealing with on a social basis, a whole bunch of things that would take up enormous amounts of time on my part to even to acquire, and then to understand it after you've acquired it is another whole aspect of it. So if you have an historian who spent that time and done all that study, in a few minutes they can explain to you what's important that you should try to convey in this image as much as you possibly can. And that's what was so valuable about what happened.
Yeah, I take from what you're saying the importance of being able to get the kind of to build the person you're sculpting from the inside out by being able to talk to and learn from somebody who has studied their lives, their challenges, their values, the impact of their behavior in a detailed way. And then they can impart that to you, which you can then use when you create the image of them. So that sounds fascinating, Jeff, and like a really important part of your creative process. Well, this may be a bit like asking a parent whom their favorite child is, Jeff, and I'll apologize for that ahead of time, but I'm curious to find out, was there a legend who was most gratifying or intriguing for you to learn about and create a likeness of?
Well, it isn't so much that as from an artistic standpoint, when you make a piece of work, it in your mind, whether or not it's successful as an artistic endeavor, it's not so much the individual, but what you achieved was to your satisfaction, I guess is a way of saying that.
I get it.
So there's a number of pieces in there that I favor over others, but it's for artistic reasons, not for historic reasons.
Okay. Fair enough. And are you willing to share which one or two you did feel that way about, that from an artistic perspective? Yeah, you felt like, yeah, this one is special.
Well, I think the Tracy piece is particularly, I'm fond of that. I think it was rather successful.
Okay, good.
I like Dalton as well. Individual ones, they all have their thing, though. So it's like picking a child. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. And one final question, Jeff. How do you hope that having access, that viewers, visitors to the exhibit, having access to a three-dimensional sculpture of the person, how do you hope that will add to or enhance viewers' understanding of the person and their role in history?
Well, as I've said all along with all of my compatriots here working on this, is that the sculpture is basically a teaser. It's to get the individual to stop and think about this individual and this bit of history, and to spend a couple of minutes and acquiring a little bit of information about their significance. So it's really not a sculpture show; it's an informational show. And anybody going there should be really intent on gathering the information, not looking at the sculpture necessarily.
So the sculpture is a portal.
Exactly. Thank you. That's a good name for it. Yeah.
Okay, excellent, wonderful. It strikes me that's what a museum should be, a portal. So, well, Skip, I'd like to talk to you next about the work that you and Marge did. I'm eager to find out, what was it like to coordinate the work of 14 different historians?
Well, I'm going to speak for my wife, Marge, as well. We've been partners for 6 decades, and she's sitting right next to me, but some eye
Wonderful.
surgery
Hi, Marge.
has kept her from being visible to the public for just a short time. We got a call from Jeff to say he needed help as historical help to supplement his artistic endeavor. And it started out as kind of a walk in the park, just a few conversations. It's ended up over the course of that year as a marathon. And it really, there were 14 individuals that Marge was aware of which we were actually a couple of the writers, and a fashion historian, Lois Vallejo. And Marge contacted them. She had worked for the Historical Society, Museum of Old Newbury, for 14 years doing historical queries and had contact with a wide range of people. When she contacted this group, everyone committed immediately to the endeavor. There was never any, well, let me think about it, or I'm really very busy. It was a good commitment. They were all on time in their writings, except me. And I got pushed around a little bit by her. Each of the historical historians were asked to write a short narrative that went on the panel board in the exhibition, and then a larger essay of maybe 4 to 5 pages that is in the exhibition book that accompanies this exhibition. It's about 150 pages, of which we were co-editors. That was part of the marathon, the final surge to the finish if you ever published a book.
Jeff's statements.
And then there were artistic statements in each of the sections that Jeff wrote, which were really underlined and gave the perspective of the artist, the fashion challenges that he faced, the historical, how to place the figure and that kind of thing. Cameron Sesto in Newbury was the graphic designer that laid the book out, and it has just, the first 150 copies have come off the press. They are at the museum, the Custom House Maritime Museum. It was a delight to finally see those.
Wonderful. Yeah. So from walk in the park to marathon, but it's done and available, which is wonderful.
At some point, I would like to briefly read each of the contributors and their subjects, if you think that's appropriate.
Well, let's wait to the end,
Yes.
if that's all right with you.
That'd be fine, yes.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'm curious to find out the volume's title that you and Marge co-edited is Legendary Newburyporters Sculpture by Jeffrey Briggs, a Chronicle of Achievement in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so I'm curious to find out, you have all these individual stories, significant stories of the legendary Newburyporters, but it also is a chronicle that spans 2 centuries, the 18th and 19th centuries. So that's a lot of time. So I'm curious to find out about that part of your marathon, Skip. How did you weave the sculptures and the individual stories of the legends with the larger narrative that these 2 centuries of life in Newburyport, because there was a lot going on in the 18th and 19th centuries?
Well, the skill of the historians that wrote the narratives placed the individuals in that historical context. There was also a dimension that Jeff briefly alluded to, that we were asked, that each of the writers was asked to interpret in contemporary times what the meaning of that sculpture and that individual's life was. So you tied together the contemporary vision of that and then tied into, if you go to the figures that are in the earliest birth is Reverend George Whitfield, 1714. And then you go up to Donald McKay being born in the 1880s. One of the challenges we have, which I'd like to add, is that as we defined the exhibition in the early period of working in the steering committee, we needed to add more women.
Mhm.
It was the history of Newburyport is dominated by male, obviously white male men, and Anna Jakes was one clear example of
Yeah.
a late 18th century, very modest. She was from a farming community, lived on Parker Street her entire life, but had inherited money from her unmarried siblings and was able to donate what today is worth about $600,000 to the beginning of the Anna Jakes Hospital.
On the nursery.
At the nursing home. So that was one example.
It was a hospital.
But how to add another? And then I raised the point that we had no enslaved individual represented in the exhibition. That led to the final sculpture, which is a 4-figure one. And I would rate that my favorite.
Okay, your favorite child.
It dealt with a woman of the merchant class in the 1770s with an enslaved young woman that was a domestic servant, actually, but owned by the Tristan Dalton family that was caring for their 4-year-old child. And that group was out in the streets being approached by a peddler from the rural, a peddler from the rural community to sell flowers. So this sculpture is, when we finally defined it at the end of the exhibition, Jeff went crazy. I've now got 4 more sculptures to do because this is just magnificent. And I think the enslaved Black woman was confidently in care of that 5-year-old is kind of my favorite individual in the exhibition. But we rounded out that historical perspective and tried to relay women and the enslaved individuals that were part of the Newburyport history of that period.
Which will impart greater reality, and that type of representation is important. That sounds, and it sounds like a magnificent and moving sculpture as well. So thank you for telling us about that, Skip. I really appreciate that. Well, Skip, you and Marge were also the historians and writers for 2 legends, and I was hoping, let's start with legendary Captain Moses Brown, please, and please tell us what got you and Marge interested in him and what makes him legendary.
Well, Captain Moses Brown was born on Rings Island in the 1740s, overlooking the harbor. And as I wrote, destined to command at sea, destined to fight at sea. And he lived his entire life on the ocean. He was married. They had 8 children. 2 of them died young. They lost 2 buried in the ocean. So that, but the way I related to that, he was commissioned a captain in the United States Navy when Newburyport built the sloop of war Merrimack that was a ship donated essentially by the town, followed by other communities on the East Coast to supplement the Navy, which was in desperate need of ships as the French privateers were ravaging commerce. Newburyport lost 77 vessels. William Bartlet was the largest of those. So they built that, and they selected Moses Brown from obvious experience and combat duty to be commander of that ship. And she sailed with a Constitution in the squadrons in the Caribbean. So he had that, but I had a personal reason. My father was also a captain in the Navy, a decorated combat veteran. So I had, and his wife, Moses Brown's wife, had to raise children largely in his absence. My mother raised me in my father's absence during the entire period of World War II. So I added a personal perspective to that that story.
Yeah, I can hear the parallels that would make that an emotionally kind of meaningful connection for you and get you interested in his biography. Well, thank you for that, Skip. That's really interesting. You and Marge did one other legend, and could you tell us a little bit about William Bartlet?
Well, William Bartlet, the mall is named after his family, but actually his son was the one that committed funds to help restore Frog Pond. But William Bartlet was we're writing a biography of William Bartlet. We've also will soon publish a history.
We had to put it on hold.
The biography got put on hold by Mr. Briggs. And we're writing about the history of his beautiful Georgian Federal House on Federal Street. Bartlet was born into a family that were first settlers, all of whom 6 generations of shoemakers, and he started his career as a shoemaker under the apprenticeship of his father. But he soon went into the maritime trade, and actually we discovered that he worked, as he said in a deposition, I worked for my father in 1760s in his West Indies trade. His father owned a vessel. The legends that have come through the family have given William all the credit and none to his father, and that we corrected that balance. He went on by 1790 to be the wealthiest individual in Newburyport, and he continued to contribute to the town. He also was noted for his support of theological learning. He committed funds to the establishment of the Calvinist Andover Theological Seminary on the grounds of the Phillips Academy. It has since moved, but that institution is now part of the Yale Divinity School. So his contribution extended into that phase and really the last years of his life. But he continued with the ships in the China trade. He never went to sea. He was land-based, but his ships continued until 3 years before his death, trading with China. So he was a man of power. He was huge, powerfully built. He's called a man of iron nerves and iron form, irons. So he's a really interesting character. His home is gorgeous. It's been renovated. It's part of the Federal Street Overlay District. It is just terrific.
Maybe I can have Susan talk about Jacob Perkins. She's the writer and the historian for that individual, and has some interesting reasons as to why this individual is considered legendary. Susan?
Thank you, Joan. Jacob Perkins spanned both centuries, 1766 to 1849, and was very active during Newburyport's golden age of sail, but he had nothing to do with that. I first became introduced to him when I arrived at the Museum of Old Newbury, because the museum in 2007 had purchased an 1808 3-story brick structure that was Jacob Perkins' printing and engraving building. And even though many of us familiarly call it the Mint, that's a misnomer because no coinage was ever produced there. But Jacob Perkins didn't focus his entire life on printing and engraving. His first apprenticeship was at age 12 to a silversmith named Elias Davis. And he learned watch and clock making during that period too. It was an apprenticeship of only 3 years because Elias Davis died very suddenly. Instead of abandoning the business, he took over Davis's silversmithing business very successfully and stuck with it for a couple of years. And I think that's something, a habit that we will see throughout Perkins's life. He never stayed with anything for very long. By 1788, Massachusetts was producing its first coinage. And using his die making skills that he had learned in the silversmithing trade, he produced the first Massachusetts 1.5 cent coin, the design for that. By 1790, 2 years later, he had invented a nail making machine and set up a factory in Byfield. And by 1795, he'd improved that machine so it could cut and head nails at the same time, and he'd moved his business to Amesbury. But another thing that we see repeating in Perkins' life is that he didn't have successful business endeavors. He lost the patent for that nail making machine to his partners. In 1808, he decided to build a 3-story printing plant on Fruit Street and get involved in currency printing, because counterfeiting at that point was rampant in the colonies, and actually in the United States, not the colonies at that point. And so he went into partnership with his brother Abraham. And I think Abraham is the one who really gave me an insight into the importance of Jacob Perkins. Abraham was stalwart. He did everything that he could to support his brother. And in 2016, the museum received an enormous collection of Brown and Perkins family materials. And Captain Moses Brown, you'll like this, Skip and Marge, figured largely in the collection, as well did Abraham Perkins. And one of the Brown children married Abraham Perkins' daughter. So given this massive collection, in 2016, the museum mounted an exhibition called Captains and Currency. So the Brown family was represented with the captains, and the Perkins family was represented with the currency. What we learned was that it was Abraham who did all of the business transactions, which is probably why the currency business was so successful from 1808 through the 1820s. But by that point, Perkins had moved on to London. In the meantime, before he left for England, he invented a fire pumping engine, which unfortunately little attention was paid to it, so that when the devastating fire of 1811 engulfed Newburyport, the Perkins machine was not in use. The next year, the city selectmen decided that they would purchase a Perkins engine. He went to England because although the Second Bank of the United States was using his currency designs, and he had an 64 interlocking die steel plate, which was his real claim to fame. It prevented bills from being counterfeited. And although it was very popular in Philadelphia, and he spent time down there getting that currency and the Second Bank of the United States using that, supporters in Boston and New York would not fund Perkins's endeavors. And it was that point that he decided to go across the ocean and see what he could do in England. He wasn't successful in gaining the contract for the English currency, but he did do a lot of engraving there, some currency, a lot of postage stamps, and he continued every couple of years to invent something else. He invented what he called an ether ice machine, which was the precursor to our refrigerator, and also a steam gun, which used pressurized steam instead of gunpowder to shoot bullets. So he was on the go. His second son was with him in England and eventually inherited the family business and carried it on after Perkins' death. But Perkins, by the time of his death, had 19 US patents to his name and 21 English patents to his name. So he had more patents than any other living person at that time, which is pretty astounding. So he was very much a genius, an inventor, constantly on the go. his biographers say that he wasn't an easy man, and that because he was so bright, that was part of his failure in actually staying with one thing. But he certainly left his mark on Newburyport, and globally is recognized as an inventor of great genius.
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that brief technical glitch, but that sounds just fascinating, Susan. And it's clear to me how much hard work you all have put into this extraordinary exhibit. And I can't wait to see it, because these stories, each individual story is just remarkable, full of so much history, so much accomplishment, and so much. There's a phrase my mom used to use a lot, but these are people of great intestinal fortitude, clearly, and brilliance as well, in their different ways. And I'm so appreciative of all of the work that you've all done to put this show together. Joan, I'm sure at this point people are wanting to know, how can they find out more about the exhibit? When does the exhibit open on Saturday? How long will it be there? And so forth. So you fill us in as we close for today on just how people can find the exhibit and get more information about it.
Sure, I can do that. Before I do, I just wanted to, I didn't want to feel like a whack-a-mole, but I want to point out the book.
Oh, what a great cover.
Absolutely. I didn't want to jump in like a little whack-a-mole. So
That's okay. We can, whack-a-mole serve their purpose.
and the other thing I wanted to also point out is that all of this would not be possible without our sponsors. We had tremendous support, not only from the community with the writers and contributors, but we also have had a presenting sponsor, the H. Patterson Hale Jr. Charitable Foundation, and our major sponsor, the Newburyport Bank. We're really ones that really stepped forward with confidence that we could pull this off. And we also developed a sort of a citizen sponsorship that the community could be involved in and contribute to, whether it be a pedestal or a book or a panel label. But also the video was even sponsored by Charles and Jillian Griffin, that created the video for the Timothy Palmer. Marge Motes was a very strong advocate to get this exhibit accessible to all. The stairs in this building are challenged, and we listened and we created a video that I think is about 20 minutes long. Jason Novak and Jeff went through the exhibit, and that will be previewed and available April 2nd. April 2nd is when the exhibit opens. We open at 10 o'clock. We're going to do a Meet the Artist. So Jeff, be here with your best tied bow tie on. We'll have a fun day so people can actually meet the artist, talk to him a little bit more, and see the exhibit. The exhibit will be up until December 2023. We felt that there's been such an investment and there's such an opportunity. This whole initiative really has grown organically. If anyone handed me a script 7 months ago, I would have said, I don't have the time. But because it started off and it just gained momentum, and every time someone else got involved, they became more enthusiastic.
Yeah.
We're really looking at a lot of opportunities to engage the schools, the community, the families with a lot of the programs. So I just want to put a shout out to that.
Yeah.
Right now we're in our winter hours, so we're only open 4 days a week, Thursday through Sunday. But once some more flowers spring forward, we'll go into our summer hours. And typically we're open 10 to 4 weekdays and Saturday, and 12 to 4. So come see not only the exhibit, but also the museum. There's a lot of hidden treasures here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Joan. And we're all looking forward to summer hours for many, many reasons, because it will be summer. So thank you all so much for all the work you've done to create this incredible exhibit. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time visiting the morning show. And we'll close with one final thing, because I know, Skip, you put in a specific request at the beginning. So we will close. Our final credits for the morning show today will be you. Please tell us, you're welcome now to tell us the names of all the legendary Newburyporters. So take it, Skip.
Well, some of them you've heard, but in addition, Jerry Mullins did the Reverend George Whitfield. Clary Poirier did Lord Timothy Dexter. Bill Hallett, Theophilus Parsons. Bob Watts, Timothy Palmer. Bronson de Stadler, Nathaniel Tracy. Susan, you've heard. Dan McDougall did Edward March Blunt. Lois Walker and Marge did Anna Jakes. Lois was the fashion historian that played a key role to help Jeff do three-dimensional figures front and back. Alice Gould did Caleb Cushing. Rob Napier, who's a nationally recognized model maker, did the shipbuilder Donald McKay. And Bethany Groff Doreau did the women's, which is just an extraordinary piece and deserves careful reading of.
And it was like about
Oh, that's is that Marge wanting to add something?
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment that it was like, I compare it to a bag of popcorn. Putting it in the microwave and it was flat. And boom.
Okay.
And that's what this exhibit was.
Well, that's a great closing image, Marge. Thank you for that. And, as many of those names you were just reading are people I've heard mentioned here and there. Some of the historians I've had the great opportunity to interview on the show about other figures. And so I know that I've done a wonderful job. Well, thank you all so much for coming on the show today to teach us about legendary Newburyporters. You all are going to become legends yourself, I think, for having done the show. So thank you so much. Let's wave goodbye, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, and thanks for watching or listening today, everybody. I hope you join us next Thursday at 9 a.m. on Channel 9 for the morning show. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show at ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon, then click playlist and scroll down. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. And again, the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. It will also be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Just go to ncmhub.org and click on the cloud icon in the upper right-hand corner and scroll down. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.